You ever wonder why spiritually abusive people are able to maintain their power for so long? My name is Dr. Felucia, and I'm a licensed psychologist. And in this video, I'm going to explain why that happened. So, on to the topic at hand, why do spiritually abusive people remain in power so long? I'm sure that as you have heard or read the news, you'll come across stories about spiritual abuse that happened years ago, and yet those leaders were in power for such a long time. And it can be very disheartening to think about, wondering why does this happen? Well, the first thing is that spiritually abusive people cannot function really without a system, right? So there's a spiritually abusive leader or person, and then there's a system that supports them. And so people who engage in spiritual abuse seem to have a hand-picked group of people that are, I would say, sort of like an echo chamber for them, right? They might say that, well, they want, transparency and accountability and all that stuff, but really all these people who are part of the spiritually abusive system support this spiritually abusive leader. So that can involve things like covering up things that should not be covered up, making excuses, shaming people into overlooking things that need to be addressed, especially with the authorities. So it's important to remember that there's a system, and this system is not random. It's not something that just happens by chance. These people are selected by the leader for a reason, and they function to maintain the power of the leader. So that's really important. Another thing that this that can happen is, leaders, spiritually abusive leaders especially, can claim to have all these values, right? And one of the values that they claim to have is accountability. So they might say, we're transparent here, we're accountable. But think about the people they're being transparent with and who they're being accountable to. It's the people that they've selected, right? So that doesn't make much sense to me. If you're going to be accountable to somebody, but you've picked these people who you are controlling, there's not much that's going to happen, right? If you've watched my previous videos on this topic on spiritual abuse, that one of the rules of spiritually abusive environments is that appearance is valued much more than authenticity. And so I'm pretty confident in saying that a lot of these spiritually abusive systems that support the spiritually abusive leader are being controlled by that leader, and they're not allowed to be authentic, right? Authenticity is punished. As you know, if you're a spiritual abuse survivor, if you speak up about something, it comes at a high price, right? And so these individuals, even though they are supposed to be holding the leader accountable and all these other things, they really can't do that, because just like anybody who wants to speak up and address something or say, I don't understand this or this isn't fair, they're going to get punished and made an example of. And so that's also really important to remember, that these environments and the support, they're handpicked by the leader. Okay. Something else too is that I've noticed that seems to me like spiritually abusive leaders sort of have like a support, like a what is it called, like a backup plan, right? And so in a lot of these stories that I've heard and read about, the leader will do something, maybe it comes to light later, or something happens, but the person who's going to take over the environment is somebody that they've handpicked already, right? It could be a family member. Many times it could be family members. And so people have, told me in frustration how, well, this one pastor from this place or leader was, kicked out for these types of behaviors. But guess what? Their next, a family member just took over. And so when people see that, it doesn't really feel like that much justice has been done, right? Because in a situation like that, people would probably want a completely, new system and a new overhaul and things like that. So that's also something to keep in mind, is that when spiritual abuse happens, It's not something that just happens randomly. And so even having that plan B is a very deliberate and thought out sort of thing. And then another thing too is that when we see spiritual abuse, there's a lot of secrecy. And sometimes leaders might say, oh, well, we're transparent and we share all these things. But then people will ask about something. Well, does this person have a background check, or can I see the financial statements? And guess what? They're criticized, right? And sometimes even punished. They might say, well, why do you need to see this information? Don't you trust us, or trust your leaders? We can't share everything. You just have to trust us. And while that's true that, leaders can't share everything, there has to be a good degree of transparency in certain situations for trust to be established and maintained. Okay, so if there's anything I want you to take away from this video, it's to remember that spiritually abusive people and environments go to great lengths to create a support system. That abusive person usually is not going to be able to stay in power for long if they don't have a system supporting them. Remember that they have handpicked this system, they've handpicked the people in this system, and they really serve as an echo chamber, right? They can't really speak up, or they don't, because they're going to get punished or lose privileges and things like that. So that's how that power structure is maintained. And there's a backup plan, right? If things go south, this person who the spiritual leader probably has a strong degree of influence or control over is going to take over. And so I want you to keep these things in mind, because sometimes when people have survived spiritual abuse, they blame themselves for not doing more to take down the system and all these other things. And while, I definitely understand where the guilt comes from, you don't have a reason, you don't need to feel guilty for that, because these systems and powers and structures are in place and they're very powerful, and it's built deliberately to maintain that power. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, or you want to schedule a consultation, go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, and click on the orange button. And I'd love to hear from you all in the comments as well. What are some reasons that you think that spiritually abusive people are able to maintain their power for so long? All right, so hope to hear from your comments, and I hope you have a wonderful day that's filled with peace. Bye-bye.